Who has influenced you the most? I don't know if you want to write this down now, if you want to put it on your phone. I spent some time journaling over the holidays, and I actually put some names down. It was a really rich time for me to think it through. Who has influenced me the most? When you look back to this point in your life, who's influenced you the most? A few names came to mind for me. First of all, a few writers. I'd like to say I'm an avid reader. I buy lots of books and I read parts of them. Anybody else guilty of that? But there's several books that I've just devoured and I've even read multiple times. A few writers come to mind that have really influenced me. Brennan Manning, Henry Nouwen, a couple of longtime Catholics that, given my background, is a surprise, and yet they have really impacted my understanding of God's grace. I don't think I've read or heard anybody articulate better the love and acceptance of God more than Nouwen and Manning. When I think about theology and how I see the world and how I see God, N.T. Wright comes to mind. Just brilliant scholar, yet he writes and makes it so accessible for people like me because I'm not brilliant. I think of Philip Yancey, one of my favorite writers who has helped me struggle with doubt or struggle with suffering in the world, evil in the world. How does my faith intersect with some of those hard questions? Those are the writers among many that have come to mind that have influenced me. I think of the school teachers that I grew up with. And the first name that pops in my head is Mr. Heffernan. Mr. Heffernan was my history teacher early in high school. And I liked his class so much that even though I had no interest in Russia, I signed up for an elective Russian history the next year because Mr. Heffernan was teaching it. And he was right out of Dead Poets Society, Robin Williams. He'd jump up on the desk. He'd wear costumes of historical figures. He just was so passionate about the subject matter, and he cared about us as students. He's one of the reasons I seriously thought about being a teacher and a coach coming out of college. I think back to the coaches I had in athletics. A bunch of them come to mind, but Coach Conway sticks out. Coach Conway played baseball for the Pittsburgh Pirates at some point. He's a stud athlete. But when I knew him, he was my basketball coach. And it was ninth grade when I met Coach Conway. I was the same height I am now, about 50 pounds lighter. I could not chew gum and walk at the same time. I'd grown tall, but I didn't have any coordination. I couldn't do a layup. Definitely couldn't use my left. And Coach Conway believed in me. Coach Conway cared about me. And he took me into high school to where I actually believed I could play ball. Coach Conway made a huge impact on me. I think back to pastors in my life. Pastor Bob Shield comes to mind. And I made a commitment this week. I'm going to write him a note, if not call him outright. But I haven't talked to him in years. Bob was so different than me. Bob was short, I was tall. Bob was not athletic. Bob did not watch the same movies I watched or read the same books I read. He was Methodist. I had no history in Methodism. And Bob led people really well. I watched him lead the organization of the church. I watched him lead people one-on-one. I watched him be so calm and strong in the midst of criticism, in the midst of angst of people. And it has shaped me to this day. That was in my 20s. I think about my youth pastor who influenced me. If I haven't told any Scott Sontag stories since I got here, I'd be surprised, because Scott made a huge impact on my life as a middle school and a high school student. I'm pretty sure Scott was the only adult who really knew me as a teenager. He was the only one that knew what I did on Saturday night when I hung out with him on a Sunday. He was the only one that I would ask the really hard, perplexing questions that I didn't dare ask my parents or other people in the church because I didn't want them to know I wasn't sure if I believed this stuff. Scott had a big influence on me. He sang at my wedding years later. Of course, I think of my dad. Both my parents were very influential in my life. My dad especially, I think because I'm a guy, I watched my dad love my mom. I watched my dad and how he treated people around him. I watched my dad live out his faith on a Tuesday morning and a Thursday night and a Saturday afternoon, and it was exactly the same as what it looked like on a Sunday morning in a building like this. And that made a huge impact on my life. Who has influenced you the most? What names come to mind? Our new teaching series in the new year is obviously about parenting. We're calling it PG, Parental Guidance. But I want to be clear, and I want to be more accurate. It's actually about influence. It's about influence. This is how we'll define influence from the dictionary: the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something. Who has had influence on your life? Whose life do you now influence? Let's bring it to today. Whose life do you now influence? Whose life could you now influence? And I want to be really clear. If you're not now parenting kids in your home right now, would you please not check out on me? Would you please not today and in the coming weeks, do not check out on me. Can I point something out if you missed this? I just rattled off 9 names who had tremendous impact on my life to this point. Did you catch that 8 of them were not my parents? That's a big deal. We're talking about influence, not just parenting. Whether or not you're a parent, we all have kids in our lives. If you care about the future of the world, and specifically those kids that you have an opportunity to influence, your best chance to have influence in someone's life is to actually show up. It's not rocket science. Let me say that again. Your best chance to have influence in someone's life is to actually show up. I mean, if we want to have influence, something is required of us. We don't just drift into it. We have to show up. And of course, there's no more important place to show up than in your home or in the lives of the kids we have the most connection with. But there is a problem. Let's right off the bat, let's talk about the problem, a significant problem. It's a reason why so many of us don't show up. It's a reason why so many of us at least don't show up strategically. Here's the problem. The type of influence we're talking about, it isn't instantly gratifying. In other words, we can't always see immediate results of this influence. I guarantee you, Mr. Heffernan, Coach Conway, no idea the influence they were having on my life. Scott Sontag, my dad, no clue the influence they were having on my life. Because most of the time, I was sitting in the corner with this bored out of my mind look on my face. They had no idea the impact they were having on my life. Because kids don't tell us, do they? They don't tell us. I mean, think about toddlers. Think about 2, 3, 4-year-olds. Toddlers, they're not going to thank us for disciplining them. They're not going to thank us for teaching them how to use the toilet or wiping their snotty noses. They're not going to thank us. I mean, at least none of the toddlers I've met, right? And shockingly, this doesn't get that different when they get to middle school, does it? I mean, maybe our middle schoolers will mutter thanks when we buy them some really expensive shoes or something like that. But what's not going to happen, they're not going to take us to a coffee shop with a list of the reasons that they're so grateful we have made their future better. It's not going to happen. There's no instant gratification from this kind of influence. But here's the reality. Chances are, people showed up for you. They kept showing up for you, even though they didn't see any results. In order to address this, we've got to change the way we think about influence. So here's what we're going to talk about. Influence has got to be personal. Influence is personal. Think about how Jesus showed up and revealed to the world who God was. We talked about that over Christmas. Jesus showed up in the flesh, said, this is what God is like. And what did he reveal? He said to Zacchaeus, I'm going to go to your house today. I'm going to have dinner in your home. He made it personal. He said to Peter and James and John and Andrew, he said, come with me. I know you've been fishing for your livelihood. Come with me and fish for people. He made it personal. He meets this woman on the hot desert day at the well. He says, I know you. I know that's not your husband. I know your past. It's okay. He made it personal. Jesus showed up for people in the places where they were, in the phase of life they were in. He showed up in a very personal way, and he earned influence. Now, we confuse influence with some other things. I know I'm guilty of this. I think we all are. We confuse, for example, influence with power. We think influence comes from power. That may work for a 3-year-old. You can make a 3-year-old do anything, right? We're bigger, we're stronger, we're smarter. We have power over them. But that 3-year-old's not going to be 3 forever. And the power or influence, if we want to call it that, is going to be gone over time. We also confuse influence with success. We think that if we've had success, we have influence. Some of you have got some pretty amazing jobs, for example. You've developed these great resumes, impressive portfolios. You lead teams. You have people that answer to you. You're smart. You're a seasoned leader. People listen to you, except your 15-year-old daughter, right? And you want to say to her, I think this sometimes, you should really listen to me. I'm smart. People follow me. People know that I know what I'm doing. You should listen to me. And she doesn't because I'm not translating into her context influence. We confuse that influence with success. Or we confuse it with position. I think we do this pretty readily. You're in charge. That's why people should listen to you. You're the boss. You're the matriarch. You're TSA. You've got a uniform. People should listen to you because you have authority. Not because you're right, but because you've been given the right to tell people what to do. I was flying to Denver, not over the holidays, but before the holidays, and to see some old friends. And I don't know why they did this. This was totally random. It hadn't happened to me in a long time, but they took me aside. They frisked me. They opened up my bag and went through it. They're sniffing around with their little gizmos. And the whole time I'm 100% sure I'm going to be fine and I'm not in trouble. I didn't bring anything I'm going to be in trouble for. And still my heart is just racing, right? I feel totally helpless. Because we confuse influence sometimes with position. We can have power over someone. We can have authority over someone. Or we can have the trust of someone. Power or authority or position, that's common. That's easy. And that's actually temporary. But trust of someone, that takes time, doesn't it? Trust of someone is earned. Influence needs to be earned. If you want to have influence in your son's life, in your nephew's life, in your stepdaughter's life, you have to care enough to keep showing up in a very personal way right where they are. The one place I want to step into together in Scripture today is in the Old Testament. So open up your Bible or your Bible app to the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. Now it's the new year, so this is worth saying again. We open this thing every weekend together. More importantly, I hope you open this thing on your own, away from this place, that you learn more and more to feed yourself. This is an important book for us. If you don't have a Bible, you've got a couple options. You can download the app. It's free. It's not our app. It's a great online tool. Take it anywhere you are with your phone, your tablet. You can click on it, find different translations. You can always bring that here on the weekends and use that. If you want an actual printed Bible, we've got these pile of them in the back. They're free. You can go get one right now. You can get one on your way out. But I'll be reading from one of these printed Bibles we give away. There's this guy in the Bible. Maybe you've heard of him. His name's Nehemiah. In Christian circles or in Jewish circles, he's well known as a fantastic leader. We read the history books. He was a genius leader. And specifically, he helped in the rebuilding of the wall around the city of Jerusalem 2,500 years ago. Now, before we dig into the scripture, elephant in the room. It's 2019. When we talk about building a wall, our brain kind of goes elsewhere, doesn't it? We're not going there today, okay? Totally different circumstances. Think back 2,500 years ago. They did not have missiles or tanks or planes. Their technology was very limited. A wall around the city, in this case Jerusalem, this was a big deal. This was their only means of defense, of security, of stability. And so when we read the efforts that Nehemiah and his people went to rebuild this wall, this was a big deal. And we're going to step into the middle of the story. They're about halfway through the reconstruction process, and everything's falling apart. People are complaining. There's rumors going around. There's threats from the outside. There's an enemy outside the gates. Leadership is being questioned. Morale is going down the tubes. And Nehemiah, the leader, did something genius. It's partly why we're reading about it 2,500 years later. He was such a good leader. He specifically called up families. So open it up Nehemiah chapter 4. If you've got one of the free Bibles we give away, it's page 397. About halfway up on the right side. Nehemiah chapter 4, we're going to look at verse 12. Jumping right into this. Verse 12. The Jews who lived near the enemy came and told us again and again, they will come from all directions and attack us. So this is Nehemiah writing, first person. So I placed armed guards behind the lowest parts of the wall in the exposed areas. I stationed the people to stand guard by families, armed with swords, spears, and bows. Then as I looked over the situation, I called together the nobles and the rest of the people and said to them, don't be afraid of the enemy. Remember the Lord who is great and glorious, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. I feel like this is an epic movie I'm watching. This is why we're talking about it 2,500 years ago. Emotions were high in this moment. Can you imagine this moment? The enemy is about to attack. Everything is going south. And what does Nehemiah do? He stations families and parents at the weakest parts of the wall, and he reminds them what they're fighting for. He changes it. It's not about the wall anymore. It's not about the city. It's not about the enemy outside the gates. It's about their wives and their sisters and their brothers and their sons. It's about their homes. He raises the stakes. When Nehemiah rallied the parents, if we keep reading, everything changed. It says, when the parents stood in the gaps, the enemy decided not to attack. When the parents stood in the gaps, the enemy decided not to attack. Maybe they do. Moms and dads fight differently when they've got their kids in mind. There's a reason you don't mess with Mama Bear, right? Maybe they knew that when we look in the faces of our family, we face the enemy with a different kind of passion, don't we? Well, the rest of the story, of course, if we read it, the wall went on to be built. The city of Jerusalem went on to thrive. And the people were saved because parents showed up. What does it look like for you to show up in the lives of the people you care about? What does it look like for you to show up in the lives of kids that you have influence over? Specifically, let's talk about kids. Let's talk about little ones. Little tiny ones. I mean, they are like sponges. You don't have to know what you're doing. They are just eager to be loved. Let's talk about bigger kids. They are so ready to be loved and led. So ready to be poured into. Let's talk about teenagers. Now, while a lot of us think that teenagers don't want more adults in their lives, because that's what it can appear like to some of us on the outside, I know for a fact, I'm 100% sure teenagers are desperate to be known, to be loved, to be cared for by more adults in their lives. How can we show up for them? Well, I think one of the keys for us, if we're going to do this well, is we've got to start with some basic understanding. This is all kind of inspirational talk to this point, but we're not going to actually do it if we don't learn some things up here. Understanding uniquely where kids of different ages are biologically. I mean, if we're going to influence in a very personal way, it doesn't get any more personal than our human biology, the way their brains work, the things their bodies are capable of, their hormones, their physical needs, the context specific to their lives. If we want to show up for the kids in our lives, we have to understand the phase of life that they're in. But that's really challenging, right? I mean, how many of us in the room are experts on human development? How many of us are experts on kids? Most of us know, right? Not at all. And it's impossible for us to remember what it was like in preschool. Do you guys remember what it was like in preschool? I have no recollection of what life was like when I saw the world from about this high. I just don't have any memories of this. You've probably forgotten, like me, that it took over 75 more steps per minute than the average adult just to keep pace. That's why we need to slow down. They don't want us to pick them up over and over again because they're lazy. They want us to pick them up because they can't keep up. They're working 75 times harder to keep pace with us. I wish that when I was parenting multiple kids at my ankles, somebody had taught me this. Somebody had reminded me of these simple scientific truths so I would be less exasperated and more just willing to slow down. It's difficult to remember what it was like in elementary school. It was a long time ago, right? We don't remember the comparison crisis that comes about second grade. It's the reason we start separating, if we're smart, we start separating our small groups by genders because the girls just seem to do better at that age with each other, and the guys just seem to do better with each other in second, third, fourth grade. Now, later on, we separate them for different reasons because they're too interested in each other, right? That's a whole other conversation. It's scary to remember what life was like in middle school. Probably like me, most of us just blocked that out, right? Middle school was tough for a lot of us. We've forgotten how much we actually forgot in middle school. Did you know that a middle schooler loses a third of their cerebral cortex? It's science. It's called pruning. You probably yelled at your middle schooler recently. I was thinking about this as I even prepared this message. I'm guilty. You probably yelled at your middle schooler recently. Didn't you used to know this? Didn't I already show you how to do that? You're right. They did. And now they don't. They're not being irresponsible. They're just losing their minds. Literally. So instead of repeating ourselves, like I'm so guilty of with my middle schooler, how many times have I told you? Maybe we can learn and just come alongside them and say, hey, how can I help? How can I help? Now, we don't remember preschool, elementary school, middle school. A lot of us think we remember high school, right? Either because it wasn't that long ago for some of us, or we think we remember the high school years better. But I think we remember how it was like for us in high school, which is very different, I believe, for what kids are going through now in high school. High school students are at an unprecedented time of connection. I think my 15-year-old wakes up in the morning and is connected through her phone all the way till bedtime at night that is connected in her phone, whether she has it in her hands or not. Life was not like that for most of us as teenagers. So we think we can put ourselves in their shoes, and we really can't. Now, I don't tell you about all these different phases of kids develop to make you give up on mentoring or to give up on parenting or to give up on showing up in kids' lives. I tell you about these phases because it's incredibly important for us to understand the phases that they're going through, where each kid is personally, if we want to reach them, influence them relationally. When people typically talk about a kid's phase, it's usually a negative thing. Oh, that's a phase. It'll pass. Oh, that's a phase. We'll get through it. Well, I want to reframe that term for our few weeks talking about this, okay? A phrase is a time frame in a kid's life when you can leverage distinctive opportunities to influence a kid's future. Let me read that again. A phrase is a time frame in a kid's life when you can leverage distinctive opportunities to influence a kid's future. See, we have about 936 weeks from the time a kid is born until they move on to what's next and move on outside the home. And that may sound like a lot of time, especially if your kid is in a phase you don't particularly love. But the time will move quickly. Ask any of the empty nesters in the room. Ask any of the grandparents in the room. That time will move way quickly. So here at Colonial in the new year, we're going to talk about how we can practically engage and invest in kids and teenagers, not just in our own homes, not just in our own church, but across the city, with any of the next generation that we have in our lives. The question we need to be asking ourselves, how can we stand in the gap with parents and help be a part of creating a better future for those around us? Because it's way better for us to do this together. I'm excited about this. I'm super excited about this in the new year. I'm excited from a few different perspectives. I'm excited as a dad. I got 4 kids. I got 4 girls, 15, 13, 11, and 9. High school, middle school, and 2 in elementary. Very different phases. And I'm excited about learning some new things with you as a dad, relearning some things I've already forgotten as a dad. I'm excited as a dad. I've talked to my wife's ear off about this recently. I'm excited as a pastor because my job, very simply, is to equip you to love and lead well. So I'm excited that we're going to step into this. How can we help you love and lead kids in your home, in our church, and across our community? And I'm excited just as a kid who's grown up. I'm excited as an adult now who more and more is embracing the reality that it's not just about me loving my kids, it's about me loving your kids. It's not just about you loving your niece or your granddaughter, it's about you loving their kids and you loving their kids and y'all loving my kids. I'm excited about us stepping into this together.